If you're not already familiar with Steve Good's website, you need to check it out. I'll leave a link to this pattern in the description, but you should check out the entire site. Steve publishes a new free pattern daily, and this is one of them. I'm not even a big fan of gnomes in general, but this 4-piece gnome band caught my attention, and every time I look at these little dudes, I can't help but smile. Steve suggested half-inch stock for these, and I agree that's a good choice. I'm using poplar because it takes paint well. I'm not that good at this type of painting, so I may leave these unfinished. That way the customer can paint them whatever color scheme they wish. I'm using a number 5 Pegas Modified Geometry blade to cut this half-inch poplar. There aren't many interior cuts for each band member, and most aren't tough, but it helps to know a few tricks for cutting some of the shapes on these gnomes. I'll start with this part that shows the bottom of the gnome's hat with his nose peeking out. Most of the cut is a matter of following a straight or curved line, but the points at the sides of his nose are best done using a little trick I picked up some time ago. I cut along the curve of the gnome's nose until I reached the bottom right side of his nose. Rather than trying to make a turn there, I backed the blade to the pilot hole. From there, I cut along the other curved line on the nose's side until I reached the point where the lines met. The blade pulled the waste piece out of the board for me. Since the cut on the other side of his nose also ended in a sharp point, I cut along the bottom line, backed up to the pilot hole, and then cut along the top line. Once again, this resulted in a sharp point, and the blade removed the crescent-shaped waste piece. This was only half of the cut, so I made it similarly, except there was no sharp point at the end. Instead, there were two 90-degree turns very close together. I found that the best way to make an interior 90-degree turn is to cut right to the point where the turn needs to be made, then back off the pressure slightly. The blade is running, but no longer cutting, and I'm able to use the kerf just cut, plus maybe a tiny bit of the waste area, to pivot the workpiece to the new cutting direction. Once aligned, I put pressure back on the wood and start cutting again. The next cutout contains a corner where I use the same cutting technique. I cut from the pilot hole to that corner, then followed the line around until the cut was complete. All but that first corner is merely a matter of taking my time and letting the blade do the work. If I had to describe this next shape I'm cutting, I'd say it looks like a bolt of lightning. It's a combination of tight turns and straight lines. Although the corners here are less than 90 degrees, if you want to keep them sharp, you should use the same technique I just described for making right angles. If you're not comfortable doing this yet, you can slow the blade speed, assuming you have a variable speed saw. An alternative would be not to worry if the points turned out more curved than sharp. The cut is defining the bottom of the gnome's beard, and I think either look works here. You can probably guess how I'm going to cut this following accent, since I've already made all the moves before. I started at the wide end and cut from the pilot hole to one of the nearby corners. Then I backed up to the pilot hole and cut to the other corner. There I used the 90-degree turn technique, made the corner, and then cut across the straight line to the other corner and made the next turn. From there it was easy to follow the top curved line to its end, a sharp point. There was no need to try to make that turn because it only took a couple of seconds to back the blade to the other end where I started the cut. I moved over to the lower line, followed that to the point, and that cut was complete. There was nothing new to talk about or any new tips to give on the last interior cut, so I'm moving on to the exterior cut for the Gnome sax player. I'm starting at the bottom here because it's essential to cut the tab accurately. Each gnome has a tab at its bottom that fits into a corresponding base. I've shown you how to make an interior 90-degree corner, but these will be exterior corners. They could be made in the same way, but I'll show a better way to create sharp, accurate exterior corners. I attach the pattern to the wood with the tab's bottom against the workpiece's bottom, so I know the tab's bottom is straight and at 90 degrees to the sides. I cut inside from the edge of the workpiece vertically along the left side of the tab, and then I made a parallel cut on the right side. For each cut, I stopped the blade at the intersection where the horizontal cuts would be made, then backed the blade out to the edge. With the two vertical cuts done, I pivoted the workpiece and made the first horizontal cut for the tab on the left side. I cut until I reached the intersection with the vertical cut, leaving me with a perfect 90-degree corner. Then I did the same on the right side, and I had an ideal tab. Slot and tab construction is an excellent way to mount an item to a base, and careful cutting like this ensures a good fit. A snug fit plus a little glue creates a powerful bond between the two pieces. The remainder of the exterior cut is unremarkable, and it's purely a matter of taking my time and letting the blade do the work. I'm not cutting the gnomes in any particular order, and the next one I grabbed was the vocalist. The cut at the bottom of his hat, with his nose peeking out, is similar to the sax player's, except the sax player was turned so he had a bit more of a profile view. I made the cuts for his nose and beard in much the same way as I did for the sax player. The remaining interior cuts for the vocalist were not difficult. I cut the tab in the same way as I did the tab for the sax player. As expected, this is turning out to be an easy project. The drummer is the largest piece in the set and has the most internal cuts. There are only 2 cuts with any degree of difficulty, and these are similar to the ones from the other 2 band members, so I'll briefly recap them. The first cut that requires a bit of skill and some patience is the one that delineates the bottom of the drummer's hat and his nose. There is a sharp point at either end of his nose, and I cut along one line until I reached the point. Then I backed the blade to the pilot hole and cut the other side that meets at the point. This left me with a sharp point, and I showed you an easy way to make cuts like this. I also described how to make sharp 90-degree turns at the ends of the straight sections. That brings me to the drummer's beard with its lightning bolt shape, which makes it a challenging cut. I drilled the pilot hole near one of the directional change points and started cutting along the line to the left of that point. The line flows in a gentle curve until it reaches the next change in direction. I used essentially the same technique to make that turn as I do with a right angle, but this time I slowed the video so you can hopefully see what happens a little better. I'm holding the workpiece down with my left hand, and as I approach the turning point, you'll see that I move my right hand to the edge of the board. This allows me to pivot the workpiece to the new cutting direction. There's a very short line and then another point at the next direction change, so I used my right hand to pivot the workpiece once again. After seeing the first part of the cut in slow motion, I thought it would be fun to see the rest sped up. The rest of the interior cuts for the drummer are various combinations of straight lines and curves. I've already explained how to make tight turns and sharp points, so there's nothing more to show here. There wasn't anything new to show on the exterior cut or any cuts on the 4th band member, the guitar player, but I do want to spend a little time showing how to make the basses. I just finished cutting the drummer, so I'll make the drummer's bass first. This is the largest of the 4 basses. All 4 figures and basses are cut from the same piece of half-inch material, but I measured the poplar's thickness with a caliper rather than a tape measure and found it was 0.55 inches thick. If I'd used only a tape measure, I would have seen a thickness of a little over 1/2 inch. That's close, but as I learned long ago, close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. Actually, having been in the Army, I can tell you that close works for artillery shells as well. I did some math. Actually, I cheated and used my computer, and 0.55 converts to 35/64ths of an inch. If you can read that on your tape measure, you have both a more accurate tape measure and better eyesight than I do. So why am I making a fuss about this? It's because the band members were cut from half-inch poplar, which is really 35/64ths thick, and the pattern for the basses show a slot 1/2 inch wide. If I cut the slots according to the pattern, they will not be wide enough. To compensate for the dimensional differences, I will cut on the outside of the 2 long lines for the slot rather than right on the line. This will make the slot a bit wider than 1/2 inch, and we'll see if that's enough. It's always better to have the slot a tad narrower on the first try, because you can always go back with the scroll saw to make it wider, or you can file or sand it down if it's really close. We've arrived at one of those moments we always hope will go well on the first try, but which seldom does, the test fit. This fit is just a tiny bit too snug, as I want the drummer's bottom to touch the top of the bass. I took the bass to the nearby workbench, drew a new cut line parallel to one of the first lines, and returned to trim the slot. This time it was a bit looser than perfect, but when I add the glue to the slot and drummer's bottom, I believe I will have a good, strong fit. Since we know the lines for the slot aren't quite wide enough, there's another way that we can remark them. I picked up the vocalist gnome, set him on the bass, and drew lines against the bass. Cutting on those lines should be pretty much on the money the first time. The singer slid easily into the slot, showing that the width marking trick worked perfectly. However, the tab was a tiny bit long, so I'll trim a bit off one of the sides, and this little dude should then be a perfect fit. I still can't help but smile every time I see this gnome rock band. Steve Good named them ZZ Bottom, and I think that was a good choice, but maybe there's an even better name for them. Do you have any suggestions?